Okay, welcome to the fourth and final video where we're going to be talking about Homo erectus behavior and archaeology. So you can see there is much more substance in this video relative to behavior in archaeology and Homo habilis. And so we're starting to see more sophisticated human-like behavior, as you'll see. Okay, so what kind of habitats did Homo erectus occupy? Well, these are going to be open or lightly wooded grasslands. So Homo erectus is the first hominid species to truly occupy an open environment. And this is a big deal because there isn't much tree cover. So if you kind of wanted to scramble up a tree to get away from predators, without trees, you don't have as many fruits. And of course, without a lot of tree cover, you're exposed to predators and you're exposed to the sun. So there are a lot more challenges and selective pressures involved when going out into the grasslands. So this is a big deal. Okay, so it wasn't that Homo erectus sought out these grasslands, right? It's not like they like the feel of the grass in between their toes or whatever. It's because environments around Homo erectus, they were opening up and becoming grassier. So they had to adapt or go extinct. So here is a figure. On the vertical axis, we have the proportion of animals that are indicative of grassland habitats found in a fossil assemblage. And on the horizontal axis, we have time, going from oldest on to the left to youngest at the right. And you can see for the most part, you don't have many species found alongside hominins that are indicative of grasslands. But starting about 2.6 million years ago, you get the slight increase, and it keeps going up until when Homo erectus appears, right? You have a fair amount of grasses, and it keeps increasing well into Homo erectus times. So Homo erectus was living in an environment that was changing and becoming grassier. Okay, so what do Homo erectus stone tools look like? So if you remember with Homo habilis, you have the Oldowan industrial complex, those simple corn flakes. Well, with Homo erectus, you get something called the Acheulean industry, which starts about 1.76 million years ago, pretty much the time that Homo erectus appears. And this is what they look like. So the oldest Oldowan, dated to 1.76, is found in West Turkana, so the same site where Turkana Boy is found. And this is what they look like. Here's another picture. So with these Acheulean stone tools, you get a standardized teardrop shape. These are known as hand axes. So teardrop, teardrop, teardrop. So you didn't see this with the Oldowan core and flakes, which were kind of just made willy-nilly. Here, hominins have a mental template end product in mind that they're trying to achieve. So why are they standardized? Why is there this end product? Open question, but making something with a predetermined shape is definitely way more difficult than just knocking off flakes willy-nilly off of a core. Okay, so they can also be really big in size. So here you have a Acheulean hand axe. There's a hand for scale. They can also be quite small. And here the tip is broken off. And they're made in using the same technique that's used to make Oldowan corn flakes. So you just take a hammerstone and you knock off flakes. But of course, with the Acheulean, it's much more involved. You're trying to go for that teardrop shape, and you do what's known as bifacial flaking. So you flake one face and you flake the other side, the other face. So they are getting a lot of flakes, way more than the old one for the same amount of rock starting out. And they even made hand axes on elephant bone. So here's the site, Bilzingsleben, found in Germany, dated about 400, 300,000 years ago. And you can see here, hand axe made on elephant bone. So very unique, probably requires more intelligence because bone has different flaking properties than stone. Also just the idea of flaking bone require some type of intelligence and innovation. Here is a famous Acheulean site in Kenya called Olorgesailie. So Kenya is found, or Olorgesailie is found in southern Kenya. It's known as a catwalk site because they've erected this catwalk for tourists to walk along. But you can see here all of these stones, right? A lot of them. Each one of these is actually a hand axe, and there used to be more before tourists started stealing them. So this is the director of the site, Rick Potts. He's at the Smithsonian. But yeah, you can see here a more zoomed in picture of these hand axes. So many of them. Why that is, still an open question. Okay, so some paleoanthropologists have done some interesting research looking at the implications for the capacity for language when making Acheulean stone tools. So what do I mean by this? Well, the pre-planning and sequence of knapping events, so knocking flakes off, is similar to syntax in language. So there is this very particular sequence you have to follow, and that mimics the sequence of words in language. And they've done studies where they basically wired up subjects to brain scanning machines, and they had them make Oldowan stone tools and Acheulean stone tools. And it's clear with Oldowan stone tools that there are areas of brain activation that are similar to the areas of the brain that are used when speaking. So very intriguing link. So the Acheulean itself could be indirect evidence for Homo erectus having the capacity for language, though this is still an open question. The hand axes, how they're distributed across space is quite interesting. So you find them in Africa, but you don't find them really outside of Africa, say in Asia, where Homo erectus is found. And so this boundary is called the Movius line, named after the famous archaeologist Hallam Movius. So hand axes on this side of the Movius line, none on this side of the line. And many hypotheses have been proposed why. Some say that, well, they use bamboo to cut things in Asia. Some say that the rocks are too cruddy in Asia and aren't good for making hand axes. Other researchers say that the tradition was just lost as a founder population migrated out of Africa and into Asia. Very similar to the founder effect, right? You remember genetic drift? But these days, more recent discoveries have shown that we do have Acheulean stone tools. Here is a site in China, so you can see that teardrop shape and the extensive flaking on either side of the hand axe, and also in Korea. So again, teardrop shape. So we do have hand axes. So the Mobius line, well, it was something I learned when I was an undergrad, but it seems to be kind of falling apart now. So what were hand axes used for? This is the point in class where I would ask you if you have any ideas, but of course, can't do that. So everything under the sun has been hypothesized. So animal butchery, they thought that they made hand axes to be used as essentially like cleavers and knives. Woodworking, they thought that the hand axe itself wasn't the tool. It's just that it was a nice portable source of flakes. So very similar to the Oldowan, where the core is not the tool, but the flakes are actually the tool. And the reason you flake it in such a particular way to make that teardrop shape is that you actually get more flakes per amount of rock. Some thought that they actually made that hand axe shape so they were more aerodynamic, so you can throw them like a discus, maybe to hunt. That one's kind of ridiculous. Some thought that hand axes were used as symbols for sexual display. That is, if you can make a hand axe, it shows that you are, I don't know, intelligent, crafty, creative. I don't know, but you're supposed to be more attracted to the opposite sex. This hypothesis is also kind of nuts. Well, so people have done experiments where they make hand axes and they do things like woodworking and butchery. And the way that the edges wear down when doing these tasks and the residues left on them, they're very similar to the, well, on ancient hand axes, they did chemical and microscopic analysis of the edge damage on ancient hand axes, and that analysis suggests that hand axes were used for butchery and woodworking. Okay, so if they were using hand axes for butchery, well, how much meat did Homo erectus eat? From bone surface modifications, we know Homo erectus was getting earlier access to carcasses compared to Homo habilis. So what do I mean by bone surface modifications? There are things like cut marks, right, indicative of flakes or hand axes being used to cut off meat, and sometimes they'll accidentally score the bone. Percussion marks, so they were actually using stones to bash open the bones to get at the marrow. So you can see here, these are notch marks from where the hammerstone struck the bone. And they also leave these little indentations called percussion marks. So from studying these, we know that Homo erectus had earlier access to carcasses compared to Homo habilis. What do I mean by that? Well, okay, so this is what early access looks like, right? You get to the carcass earlier in time after the animal dies, before the predators get there. Whereas this is late access where you get there way after the predators get there and have pretty much eaten everything off of the skeleton. So it's thought that Homo habilis had late access and so really only had access to meat scraps and marrow within the bones, whereas it was thought that Homo erectus were able to get to carcasses earlier and had access to more meat. How were they able to do that? Did they hunt? Were they smart enough to be able to track these carcasses across the landscape and pinpoint their location shortly after the animal died? Were they able to drive off carnivores who killed the animal? That's an open question. We can't really distinguish between those options. All we know is that Homo erectus had earlier access and therefore access to more meat. Okay, so here is a video basically illustrating how it works when you drive predators off of a carcass. It takes a crazy amount of skill and knowledge and experience, such as tracking the predators. It requires sophisticated technology for quickly cutting meat off the bone, so you could get in there, get the meat, and get out before you're harmed by predators. So I will leave this video on canvas and you can watch it. Did Homo erectus use fire? So there are actually burnt stone tools and reddened patches of earth at the site of Cubifora, where Homo erectus is found, dated to 1.5 million years ago. So the reddened patches of earth, you can kind of see it here, even though it's a black and white photo. These are of the same shape and pattern that are left when you actually have a campfire. So this is kind of evidence that Homo erectus actually controlled fire, didn't necessarily make it, but had access to it. Although this is controversial, but yes, possible use of fire at around 1.5 million years ago. And so when you think fire, you immediately think cooking. Fire is also great for keeping predators away. So when we're actually camping out on the African savanna at night, there are predators and carnivores all around, but they are scared of fire, right? If you ever watched The Jungle Book. So having a nice campfire roaring keeps the predators away. So you could think of when Homo erectus left the trees, no more climbing, well, instead of sleeping in the trees and being safe from predators, maybe they were able to sleep on the ground because they had access to fire. Still an open question. Okay, so what are the evolutionary implications of eating more cooked meat? Okay, so meat, again, is calorically dense, right? And if you're able to cook the meat, that means less work your jaws have to do, less work your digestive system has to do. Cooking also breaks down the meat. You're able to release more of the calories and nutrients. And all of that helps fuel that larger brain that Homo erectus has, right? Remember, the brain is a very energetically expensive organism, and it's also been hypothesized that with more meat, you're able to grow and evolve these larger bodies that we see in Homo erectus. Okay, with larger brains, it means more intelligence, so you're able to make sophisticated stone tools like Acheulean hand axes, and you're able to control fire. And what that means is, right, you're able to get more meat. So fire to cook and break down the meat, and hand axes to butcher the meat. And larger bodies also means more efficient bipedal locomotion, right? So that means you have larger foraging ranges. So if you have larger foraging ranges, you're able to cover more ground and encounter more carcasses, right? So maybe this is one of the reasons why Homo erectus was able to access carcasses earlier. I forgot to mention that if you're out in the African savanna, if you want to locate a carcass, all you have to do is look up at the sky. And if you see vultures circling around, that means there's a carcass right underneath. So maybe Homo erectus was smarter and was able to pick up on that. Okay, with the Acheulean and fire, that means more processing of the food before it enters the mouth. So it means smaller teeth and less intense chewing, right? So all of this is related, right? So these are the evolutionary implications of eating more meat. So I'm going to finish with, well, we know Homo erectus left Africa at about 1.8 million years ago. The question is, why? Right, so perhaps the greater cognitive ability associated with larger brain size, more efficient locomotion associated with the larger statures, longer legs, and fire allowed Homo erectus to follow expanding grasslands out of Africa to expand its foraging range. Right, and fire is important because all of these earlier sites are on the floor of the Rift Valley, right, where it's nice and warm and hot. And to leave the Rift Valley, you have to climb the flanks and go to higher altitudes to the point where it's about like 50 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And it gets very cold at night. And so it's thought that Homo erectus could not survive without fire. Or all of what I just said, maybe not. It's an open question. So why did Homo erectus leave Africa at 1.8 million years ago? That was a hypothesis proposed, but yeah, we still don't know. Okay, so that concludes the fourth and final video. So I went over how Homo erectus is distributed through time and across space, and the history of its discovery with Dubois. We went over its morphology, how pretty much from the neck down, it looks like us, and thus was obligate biped. And we do see more modern features in the skull, like a larger brain, smaller teeth, smaller face. Went over some important specimens and sites and highlighted the migration out of Africa and how it happened very quickly. And we went over the behavior and archaeology, way more sophisticated than Homo habilis. And so we're starting to see some things that look more like us, right? Sophisticated tools, control of fire, early access to carcasses, a lot of meat, so on and so forth.